Hey, everybody, Ron Tolson here with My Daily Bread, the podcast, and I'm excited to welcome back today to episode number 15, Dr. Alan McCray, my coach and mentor. And many of you have already considered him your coach and mentor also. So, everybody, welcome Dr. McCray as we get into the conversation today about trauma and the church. Dun, dun, dun. Right? We're going to talk about trauma and the church. Stay tuned. You're going to hear some stuff that might make you want to turn off the podcast. You're going to hear some things that will probably make you curious and lean more into the podcast today. But I can guarantee that Dr. McCray is going to share some things with you and with us today that might make us take a second look at how we have experienced trauma and the church. Dr. McCray, thank you so much. I call you Doc. I'm just going to call
That's
you
fine.
Doc.
Yeah,
Doc, thank you
please.
so much for being back here again
Yeah.
today. And I am honored to have this conversation with you again. I get to sit in on Thursday nights
Yes.
with you currently in advanced coaching, trauma coaching. And I'm learning so much. I sit there and just like a sponge, just soaking it in, all of the things you're saying, because it's very contrary to the conditioning that I've received growing up in church. So I want to
Yes.
have that conversation today.
All right.
Thank you for being here today. There's so many questions and so many things around trauma that I think we just skip right over it, either because of ignorance or because we don't know what to do with it. We want to place it as something else. But you made a statement this past week in class that has resonated with me every day. And that statement was something along the lines of, you can't heal a demon and you can't cast out a hurt.
Yeah. Can't cast out a wound and you can't heal. Some people are trying to counsel the devil, and some people are trying to cast out wounds,
hmm
and you got to know the difference.
Got to know the difference.
Yeah.
How do we know the difference when it comes to trauma? And how do we even begin this conversation in the religious community? Because and I believe in our religious community, we've had our own ideas about this anyway. So how do we begin
Yeah.
to even talk about trauma and the church?
Had an interesting email from one of the students of the class this past week. That very loving, caring person said this has opened up her mind so much that she thought trauma was demonic, that it was a demon that needed to be cast out, uh,
Mhm.
which is pretty typical because in the church world, anything we don't understand, we just demonize it. And that seems to legitimize our position. And what we're experiencing today, and part of this is come out of the pandemic because the whole world was traumatized during the pandemic
And not even realizing
and
it.
not even realizing it. I have people I'm working with right now that are traumatized with the fear of getting COVID again.
Oh, wow.
And it's literally impacting their lives.
Mhm.
And so we're working through some of that kind of trauma. Um, well, let's go back to some of the basics about trauma.
Perfect.
Everybody experiences trauma.
Okay.
Everybody's not traumatized.
What's the difference?
The difference is, and I gave this example in the class, if we're driving along the street and the policeman behind us turns on his lights and his siren, we're traumatized right there.
Yeah.
We have a bit of trauma. We stop breathing. We become rigid. We're looking around us. If the policeman then passes us and goes on, we let out a big sigh of relief.
Ah.
Or we may hear something during the night in our house. I got a new refrigerator a few months ago, and it dumps ice loudly. So the first night we had it, it dumped ice into the bin, and I heard it from my bedroom, and I thought somebody was breaking in. Sounded like glass breaking. Immediately I froze. We tune our ear to hear. That's orientation trauma. We're trying to, where did that sound come from? Once I figured it out, I relaxed. I wasn't traumatized. Traumatization is when we have an experience or a continuation of experiences that so impact our brain, and I'll break that down in a minute, that so impacts our brain that we start viewing life through that experience.
Mm-hmm.
So everything is filtered through that past experience. A great example, oversimplistic, the soldier that comes home from the battlefield who has been traumatized hears a car backfire and he responds to it as though it's artillery fire.
Mm-hmm.
I have a nephew who was on the battlefield in Vietnam, and no, in Iraq, I'm sorry. And he hates the 4th of July. The fireworks, he's experiencing them through the trauma that he had on the battlefield.
Oh, wow.
So that's the difference between all of us having trauma and us being traumatized.
Mm-hmm.
It's the simplest way I know how to explain it.
That's a fascinating description.
Yeah.
I think they used to call that shell shock, didn't they?
In World War I, it was introduced as shell shock,
Okay.
yes.
And you're saying that that's trauma,
That's,
traumatized.
yes,
Okay.
PTSD,
PTSD.
post-traumatic stress disorder.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so I did some homework, and I feel like there's so many questions around the topic of trauma and the church
Yes.
that I want to try for us to answer today. At least give some direction on where we need to go with the conversation and how we can help. Church people from around the world are gathering on My Daily Bread, the podcast. And so it's quite a unique platform that's offering us an opportunity to speak in and bring clarity to so many different areas of life. One of the questions that came out in the conversation about trauma and the church is, what is the church's role in helping to heal those who have been traumatized?
Yeah.
What part do we play?
The first part would be prevention,
Okay.
that the church should be not a place to be traumatized. The church is kind of like our family. We expect it to be a safe place.
Mm-hmm.
People come into the church feeling like it's supposed to be safe. And it is supposed to be safe. But unfortunately, there's a lot of spiritual abuse that goes on from the pulpit to the pews, from top to the bottom, so to speak. People come in expecting it to be safe, a safe environment, a healing environment, and then they are wounded. Their expectations of being safe are no longer safe. We saw this in the Catholic Church several years ago now when the covers were pulled back.
Yes.
And all of the sexual molestation that went on there.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting, God will pull the covers back.
Every time.
Every time.
Every time.
He wants sin exposed.
Yes, he does.
And so it's always going to be the case, but unfortunately, many people get wounded. Mm-hmm. And if we think of it as a wound in which people view every experience. A number of years ago, when I was senior pastor, I had a radio program, and people would come to the church as a result of hearing me on the radio. And I had a lady that kept coming, but never made it in the building. And she finally got a message to me one day, I'm trying to come to your church, but I can't get in the building.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, okay, what's going on here? So further inquiry, she would get in the parking lot and have a panic attack. She had been wounded in the church so deeply that now the very fact of trying to enter a church building set off a panic attack, which is a panic attack is simply our nervous system reacting to a feared or perceived feared experience.
Mm-hmm. That's amazing. Okay. How has trauma been misunderstood in the church?
It's not just misunderstood in the church, it's pretty well misunderstood throughout our culture.
That's helpful.
Yeah.
I mean, to think that it's not just a church issue, but this is a worldwide issue.
Yes. It is viewed as something, what's wrong with you? Just get over
Why
it.
you can't just get over it.
Just pull yourself up by your bootstraps and get on with life. If you had faith, you'd get over this. If you really wanted to, you'd be healed of this. If you really wanted to. What people don't understand is trauma is not a response. Trauma is a reaction.
Okay. What do you mean by
A
that?
response is something we think about, how we're going to deal with something. That's a conscious behavior. Reaction is instinctive. It's not a thought. It's a reaction.
It happens
Instantaneously.
nanoseconds.
For example, somebody that's been abused, maybe they've been slapped, hit, or they've been in a car accident and T-boned, and their peripheral vision, they see a hand raised or a car coming. They don't think, oh, okay, I have to raise my hand to stop this blow, or I have to protect myself from this oncoming car. It's a reaction, instinctive. We don't think to put our hand up, we put our hand up. We don't think to dodge, we dodge. We don't think to protect, we protect. It's a reaction. And it actually comes out of what scientists call our reptilian brain. Think of 3 levels of the brain. We got our conscious brain, that's where the executive thinking goes on. We got our subconscious, our middle brain. This is where we often talk about our subconscious. This is where our memories are. Every experience we've ever had is in that part of our brain. It's called the amygdala. But also in that part of our brain is our adrenaline glands, where when the response comes, dumps adrenaline into our system, cortisol into our system. The third layer is what scientists call our reptilian brain. Our reptilian brain is the first part of our brain to develop in our gestation period.
Okay.
Now, don't let the reptilian brain turn you off here.
Right.
It's still part of our brain system. The reason it's called reptilian is because it is instinctive, like a reptile. A reptile doesn't think, a reptile reacts. So it's the first part of our brain to develop, even in our gestation. So it actually absorbs experiences. Doesn't think experiences, it absorbs experience.
Like a sponge.
Like a sponge. So even the fetus in a mother's womb experiences what the mother's experiencing, and it's absorbed into the reptilian part of her brain, that instinctive part. So,
oh my goodness,
it really impacts the way a child comes into the world. If a mother's been under a lot of stress, that baby's going to come into the world stressed. And this gets us into some deeper thinking. But let's go back to the church world. The Bible talks a lot about trauma.
I love this.
We just don't, it doesn't use the word trauma. One of my favorite passages about this is Ezekiel 37.
Mind blown.
The valley of dry bones.
Okay.
We think of this as a bunch of skeletons laying out there. No, this is a group of people who had been traumatized. In verse 9 of the 37th chapter, it actually tells us a little bit about this imagery. It says, this is those that have been slain. In other words, they have been wounded.
Okay.
This is traumatization. This is a nation that's in trauma. They're traumatized. Their parts are cut off. It's part of the language. They said, our bones are dried up within us. When the Old Testament talks about dried bones, it's talking about depression. They didn't have the language that we have today, and we don't have the language they had. But dried bones, they were in deep depression.
My whole life I saw is
Yeah,
skeletons coming together.
yeah.
But I love what you're teaching now. Yeah.
This was a nation that was in traumatized. And God spoke to Ezekiel, and he asked him an interesting question. He said, "Can these bones live? Can they be healed?" And Ezekiel didn't answer yes or no. He said, "Only you know." I think that's my personal insight here, that it was a test from God as to whether Ezekiel would judge them or not.
Oh, wow.
You can't speak life into people that you're judging.
Mic drop.
If he had judged them, he couldn't have spoke life into them. So the people that we're judging, condemning, shaming, we can't speak life into them.
Cannot speak life into them.
So Ezekiel passed the test. So he said, "Now prophesy
didn't.
unto them."
I haven't passed that test. I'm working on that test.
Aren't we all?
My goodness.
So when he began to speak life into them, they begin to become alive. Here's an interesting thing here. It said the joints started coming back together, and sinew, the nervous system that attaches the bones, the joints, came back together. He was literally rebuilding their nervous system by the word of prophecy of the Word of God. Totally rebuilt their nervous system.
That's, my goodness.
That's what's supposed to happen
That's what's
in church.
supposed to happen in church.
Yeah, when we speak the word.
I don't know if I've ever seen that imagery before. I heard you teach this last week, and this is resonating with me more than it ever has before.
Yeah.
Because I've been the little boy in Sunday school that has heard the Valley of Dry Bones.
Yeah.
And the understanding that this is skeletons coming to life. And,
Yeah.
you know, kind of as a kid, 8-year-old kid, that's
Sure.
exciting to hear.
Sure.
You know, it's kind of cool, the zombie culture, you know.
Sure.
But to hear it this way with a different understanding about how this is depression, this is lives torn apart, being restored and brought back into newness. Now I see the invitation and a directive for the church, for those leading the church, for those helping the church, apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, teachers.
Yeah.
Now I see a whole new role at work, that we have a duty,
Yes.
literally a
To
duty
heal the
to
brokenhearted.
heal the brokenhearted.
And I believe, again, my opinion, I believe the word brokenhearted is Old Testament language for traumatized people.
I feel that same way too.
Yeah. It's not just your girlfriend left you, your wife left you. It's that brokenhearted, the breaking up of those life systems that are out of dysregulation. That's what traumatization does to us. It dysregulates life and those systems in us that are so powerful and important that they work together.
Man, my goodness. So what are some of the ways that we can identify when we are interacting with someone who is traumatized? How do we identify, instead of calling it a devil, instead of saying, you know, that person's just full of, they've got an evil spirit on them? How do we identify with grace that, you know what, they might actually be working through trauma?
One of the most obvious signs is drama.
The whole world is full of it. Okay.
Yeah. Drama is actually the acting out of unhealed trauma.
Okay.
Again, post-traumatic stress disorder is most usually identified with soldiers.
Mhm.
The drama a soldier will go through that has been traumatized, acting out his past experience. I can tell you stories. One person told me of the story of her father, a Vietnam vet, who actually, she came home one day and he had literally shot up the house.
Oh, wow.
He thought he
Good
was
thing
being
she
invaded.
wasn't home.
Pardon?
Good thing she wasn't home.
On that occasion, yes, she wasn't
Wow.
at home.
My goodness.
So the drama
The
is
drama.
a big indicator. And it doesn't have to be shooting up the house. It's just repeating the same argument over and over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Having the same behaviors over and over and over again. And as a trauma that may not be as obvious as the soldier or somebody that's been in a car accident or somebody that's been raped, but a behavior that is continually repeated over and over and over again, or somebody is hyper about something,
Mm-hmm.
or hypo. Hyper means overly active,
Mm-hmm.
hypo, underly reactive.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes are the result of trauma.
Trauma.
Yeah.
Wow.
So obsessive gambling could be started out as trauma,
Mm-hmm.
somebody trying to self-medicate,
Mm-hmm.
drinking, drugs, of course, all of those things. Continual battle. Somebody's just continually putting up a front of battle. They're continually fighting,
Mm-hmm.
or they're continually running away. The fight or flight.
Fight or flight.
Yeah.
The fight, flight, or freeze.
Yes.
Those systems. How do those play into trauma?
The fight or the flight is the result of our sympathetic nervous system.
Mm-hmm.
The freeze mode is part of our parasympathetic nervous system. I don't know if we got time to break all of that down today. Maybe another opportunity we could do that. But trauma, people often think they're crazy because they've been told they're crazy.
Yeah.
Trauma is not stored in our executive mind. It's
Mm-hmm.
not stored in our rational mind. It's actually stored in that reptilian part of our brain,
Mm-hmm.
which is part of the sympathetic nervous system. So the sympathetic nervous system works like an alarm system in your house or place of business. It's always scanning for intrusion. That's what our sympathetic nervous system does. It's always instinctively, not thinking, but instinctively scanning our environment. If we have not had traumatization, then we see our world is pretty safe and everything works good. Let me give you a quick example of the way the sympathetic nervous system works. Have you ever been in a room and felt somebody staring at you?
Yes.
You didn't think, oh, somebody's staring at me.
Mm-mm.
Your sympathetic nervous system set off a sensation
Mm-hmm.
in your body that tells you somebody is staring at me. Maybe they're behind you, but you know. So your sympathetic nervous system is what's instinctively telling you that somebody's eyes are locked in on you.
Almost like the phrase we've used, you got eyes in the back of your head.
Yeah.
Because you just experienced that.
It's in your sympathetic nervous system.
Okay.
Well, somebody that's been traumatized, they will be triggered by whatever. I've told you the story, and I used it in my class of the woman that was attacked by a man wearing a red plaid shirt.
Mm-hmm.
She beat off the attacker, but was still traumatized. She could do fine in any social setting, any public place, unless she saw a red plaid shirt. Now, there's no danger in a red plaid shirt, but her sympathetic nervous system now has been attuned to a red plaid shirt, that represents danger. So she has to view every red plaid shirt as though that is a dangerous person. She's not thinking that. Rationally, she knows it's not the red plaid shirt, but instinctively, the red plaid shirt.
It's become like imprinting.
It's been imprinted into the sympathetic nervous system.
Wow, that's fascinating. We raised horses. We used to imprint horses right when they were born, make them desensitized to things that would normally make them go crazy, like plastic bags and the clippers and the noises that would come around and make them spook. So we would desensitize them. That's a fascinating thought right there. What are some of the biggest breakthroughs that you've experienced within the church in this topic of trauma? What are some breakthroughs that you've seen? Let's give some hope out there.
Yeah. First of all, we want people to feel safe. Mm-hmm. They have to feel safe. I shared this example again in the class the other night, that at our church, one Wednesday night when I had spoke, there was a young lady down at the altar praying. Somebody was praying with her, and she was weeping out of control. She was convulsing. Mm-hmm. She was crying so hard. And the lady that was praying with her kept telling her how much God loved her. And the more that this woman would say, God loves you, the more out of control the young lady would become. So I stepped in and asked the lady that was praying for her if I could speak to her. And of course, she allowed me to. So I said to the young lady, I said, I know that thinking of God's love scares you because love has traumatized you. I didn't use that language. I said, love has hurt you. I said, what I want you to know is that God is a safe place for you. Mm-hmm. When I changed the language, she began to calm down. Wow. The breakthroughs in the church have to come from the side of ministry that we're providing a safe place for people. Mm-hmm. From the other side, I have to teach people just because it's church doesn't mean it's safe.
Yeah.
Just because it's family doesn't mean it's safe.
That's right. Yes.
These are the places that we're the most vulnerable. Mm-hmm. The places where we are supposed to be the most safe are the places that we're the most vulnerable. Mm-hmm. So we have to understand, help people understand, church isn't perfect.
No.
But at the same time, it can be safe.
It can be safe. Not perfect, but it can be safe.
Yes.
That's a great thought. Wow. How does the word factor in to healing trauma?
The word used as a tool, not a weapon.
So good.
We can weaponize the Bible. Mm-hmm. That doesn't help anybody. But the word is truth. Mm-hmm. And truth will always resonate with us.
That's good.
Truth, the soul, our soul, recognizes truth. Mm-hmm. And the word is truth. And so truth will always resonate with our soul. Mm-hmm. And that very, I'm going to turn off some religious folks here.
That's okay.
The very vibration.
Yeah. Brace yourself.
Of the word of truth. Uh-huh. Vibrating with the soul brings peace.
Yes, it does.
And calm.
I love that. Okay. 2 more questions.
Okay.
You have stated many times in the past that people who have experienced trauma in the church were not believed. How do we address that when it appears that, or when someone is experiencing trauma, but they don't feel believed?
Yeah.
Are we going right back to the safe place again?
Exactly. People have to feel safe.
Okay.
If somebody reports an abuse,
Mhm.
the best thing we can do for them is to believe them.
Amen.
Now, that doesn't mean there don't need to be some investigation,
Agree. Yes.
but to believe them.
Mhm.
One young lady that I worked with was date raped by her youth pastor.
Oh my goodness.
When she reported it to the elders, they told her, no, that is not possible.
Yeah.
He's a fine young man. He would never do that.
Mhm.
Well, that says you're not a fine young woman. You're the cause of it.
Mhm.
And particularly in rape, we have to be sensitive. Women are most often always made, let me start that over. Too many words coming out of my mouth. Women are often made feel guilty
Yes.
for being raped.
Mhm. Yes, they are.
You ask for it, you shouldn't have been there, you shouldn't have looked like that, you shouldn't have dressed like that, blah, blah, blah. No, a woman is never guilty for being raped. The rapist is the guilty one.
Yes.
We have to start believing people.
That's so good.
Yes, let there be some investigation, but let's not discount them
Mhm.
in the beginning.
That's powerful. That's really powerful. Last question. What systems can we as the church develop or build in order to deal and heal trauma, to deal with and heal trauma? What are the systems that we can create within our bodies?
First of all, in the church, we have to let grace be the ruling factor.
Yeah.
Something that I believe the Holy Spirit spoke to my heart the other day, and I haven't shared this thought with anybody else at this point. If God can't trust us with his grace, he can't trust us with his people.
Amen. That's really good.
We have to experience and steward the grace of God.
Mhm.
If we can't do that, God can't trust us with people.
I agree with that. That's powerful. Say it again, because I'm like internalizing that.
If God can't trust us to steward his grace,
God can't trust us to steward his
he can't
grace.
trust us to steward people.
He can't trust us to steward.
That's to the pastors out there
That's really good.
and pastoral leadership,
Amen.
whatever role
That's really good.
that may look like.
Wow. One last bonus question.
Okay.
Promise, last question. Because I think there's a lot of clarity. There's clarity for me, even from our classes on Thursday nights. How does trauma affect men and women differently? Or does it at all?
I don't know that if there's a difference, I don't know
Okay.
at this point that it would affect differently.
Is it more about the
I
difference in
think
how
it
men
might
and
be
women handle it?
manifested
Okay.
differently.
All right.
I think men might be more aggressive.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm going to get myself in trouble here, but I'm going to go ahead and say it.
It's okay.
Men might be more aggressive. Women might be more dramatic.
Okay.
I don't want to be stereotypical.
Is
there.
That's okay. Because you're giving me clarity. Is it that feeling when you want to fight
Yeah.
for the men? Is that automatically a trauma response, or that's instinctual? It would
Yes.
seem to
The
me.
fight or flight is instinctual.
Okay.
It's instinctive. It's reactive, not responsive.
Okay. Wow. Okay. I've had trauma. This is I mean, the conversation could go on and on and on. There's not really an end to having this conversation because
No.
there's so much newness to the information that's out there now. There's a lot of science now that's backing up.
Past 20 years, there's been an explosion
Yeah.
of information and treatment. Um, it used to be thought that if you went to a therapist for trauma, that you had to be there for years and years and years.
Hmm.
The leading researchers and practitioners tell you that's not true. People with a well-trained, trauma-informed counselor or coach can see dramatic results in 6 to 8 weeks. I've seen that
That's
in the
awesome.
people I work with.
That's amazing. Doc, are you still receiving new clients?
I am.
You are.
Yeah.
How can the My Daily Bread crowd reach out to you?
You could reach out to me through my email at Allen, ALLEN, at lifeimpactllc.com.
That's awesome. And I highly recommend Doc. Is amazing. And if you think you are experiencing trauma, or you believe that you have been traumatized and you want to reach out and speak with someone, I highly recommend you reach out to Doc. He would be more than happy to uh, give you that information that you might need and help you through that process. Um, I highly trust this man. He's an advisor on one of my boards, and uh, you don't want to miss this opportunity, this wisdom that flows from him, and the grace. I mean, look at him, right? The grace that flows right out of his life regarding this topic is quite amazing. So if you have experienced that and you want some help, reach out to Doc. If you want more information, you have more questions, reach out to me. I'll make sure that you get connected with Doc in a way that would bring some help to your life. But this conversation certainly won't stop today. We'll have to have Doc back again and really dig more into this topic because it's too big for one episode on a podcast. It's way too big. But here's what I know: the grace of God is on our lives, and God does not want you to remain the way that you are. Grace, that voice of grace, is calling you to live higher and better than you've ever lived before. And it's possible. If you find yourself in a very deep low, you don't have to stay there. You don't have to remain in that low any longer. There's help for you, there's hope for you, and there's healing for you. We love you,
Amen.
and I will see you next time on My Daily Bread, the podcast. God bless everybody.